Victoria Hamilton sat at her corner table in London's most expensive restaurant, twirling her diamond ring round her finger. The large stone caught the light from the crystal chandelier above, sending sparkles across the white tablecloth. At 45, she had everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. Her mansion felt like a museum, cold and empty. Her husband had left years ago, taking their love and laughter with him. Her children rarely called, and when they did, it was only to ask for money. Her friends only stayed close because of her wealth, disappearing whenever she needed real support. Tonight, she felt particularly empty and angry at the world. She had eaten dinner alone again, watching happy couples and families round her. The expensive wine tasted bitter in her mouth, and the gourmet food felt like cardboard. She looked round the restaurant with tired eyes, searching for something to fill the hole in her heart. James Fletcher, a 23-year-old waiter, hurried between tables with plates balanced on his arms. His movements were quick and careful, like a dancer performing a well-practiced routine. He worked 2 jobs to pay for his music studies at the local college. During the day, he washed dishes at a small cafe, and at night, he served tables at this fancy restaurant. His shoes had holes in them, but he kept them polished until they shone. His uniform was old and had been mended several times, but he kept it clean and pressed. He dreamed of playing piano in concert halls, of sharing his music with audiences who would understand its beauty. But right now, he just needed to pay rent and buy food. James moved through the restaurant like a ghost, invisible to most of the wealthy customers. He had learned to smile even when he was tired, to be polite even when people were rude to him. He carried their plates and filled their glasses, while his mind wandered to the music he would practice later that night in his tiny apartment. Victoria watched James work and felt a cruel idea form in her mind. She had noticed an old piano sitting unused in the restaurant's corner, covered with dust and forgotten by everyone. It had been there for years, a decoration that no one paid attention to. A wicked smile crossed her face as she imagined the entertainment she could create for herself. She had spent years using her money to control people, to make them dance to her tune. It was the only power she had left, the only thing that made her feel important. Tonight, she wanted to feel that power again, to remind herself that she mattered, even if it meant hurting someone else. Waiter, she called loudly, making other diners look over with curious eyes. Her voice cut through the quiet conversations like a knife. "Come here." James finished serving a table and walked over to Victoria, trying to smile despite his exhaustion. His feet hurt from standing all day, and his back ached from carrying heavy trays. "Yes, madam. How can I help you?" "I'm bored," Victoria announced, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. She wanted an audience for her cruel game. "I want you to play the piano for me. Entertain me." James's face went red with embarrassment. He could feel the eyes of other customers turning toward them, watching like spectators at a cruel show. "I'm sorry, madam, but I'm working. I need to serve the other tables." Victoria's voice grew cold and dangerous. "I don't care. Play the piano, or I'll speak to your manager about your terrible service. I'll tell him you were rude to me, that you ignored my requests. Do you know how much money I spend in this restaurant? They'll believe me over you." James looked round the restaurant with desperate eyes. Other wealthy customers were watching, some with cruel smiles on their faces, enjoying the show. He saw the manager near the kitchen, busy with other tasks. He knew Victoria was right. If she complained, he would lose his job. He needed this job desperately. His rent was due tomorrow, and he had no other way to pay it. With shaking hands and a burning face, James walked slowly to the old piano. In the corner, each step felt like walking to his own execution. He sat down on the worn bench, feeling the eyes of everyone in the restaurant on him. His heart pounded with shame and anger. He had never felt so small, so powerless. Victoria leaned back in her chair, satisfied with her power over the young man. She raised her wine glass to her lips, enjoying the taste of control. She had no idea that her cruel game was about to change. Both their lives forever. James sat at the piano bench, his hands trembling with humiliation. The worn velvet seat felt rough under his legs, and the old piano keys were yellow with age. The restaurant had gone quiet, and he could feel dozens of eyes watching him like spotlights burning into his back. He wanted to run through the front door and never come back, but he couldn't lose this job. Without it, he would have no money for rent, no money for food, and no way to continue his music studies. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play a simple melody. The piano was old but had been tuned recently, and the sound was clear and sweet. At first, his hands shook from embarrassment and anger. The notes came out shaky and unsure. Like a child learning to walk, he could hear people whispering behind him, probably making fun of the poor waiter who had to perform like a circus animal for the rich woman's entertainment. But as the notes filled the air, something magical began to happen. The music started to flow through him like water flowing down a mountain stream. Years of practice, years of love for music, years of dreams came pouring out through his fingertips. The piano responded to his touch like an old friend welcoming him home. Every key he pressed felt right. Every note he played came from somewhere deep inside his soul. He forgot about Victoria's cruel smile. He forgot about his worn shoes with holes in the soles. He forgot about his empty wallet and the bills waiting at home. He forgot about the embarrassment burning in his cheeks. He forgot about everything except the beautiful sounds coming from the old piano. The melody grew stronger and more beautiful with each passing moment. James closed his eyes and let his heart speak through the music. He played about his struggles, working two jobs while other students his age were having fun. He played about his hopes, the dream of one day performing in grand concert halls filled with people who loved music as much as he did. He played about his dreams of a better life, where he wouldn't have to worry about money or food or rent. He played about loneliness and pain, the feeling of being invisible in a world that only noticed people with money. But he also played about hope and love, the way music made him feel alive and connected to something bigger than himself. The piano sang under his fingers, telling stories that words could never express. The restaurant staff stopped working to listen. Waiters froze in place with trays in their hands. The cook stepped out from the kitchen, wiping flour from his hands on his apron. Customers put down their forks and wine glasses. Forgetting about their expensive meals, even the kitchen grew quiet, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator mixing with the piano song. The music was so pure and honest that it touched something deep in everyone's hearts. Some people remembered their own lost dreams, their own struggles, their own hopes for something better. Others felt the young man's pain and determination flowing through every note. The melody spoke to the part of them that remembered what it felt like to be young and full of dreams. James played for 10 minutes, though it felt like both seconds and hours. Time seemed to stop while the music filled the room. His fingers moved across the keys like they had a mind of their own, finding melodies he had never played before but somehow knew by heart. The piano seemed to sing with joy, happy to finally be used for its true purpose after sitting silent for so long. When he finished, the restaurant was completely silent. The last note hung in the air like a prayer, slowly fading into memory. James kept his eyes closed for a moment, not wanting to return to reality. In that silence, he felt more peaceful than he had in months. Then, one person started clapping. The sound was soft but clear in the quiet room. Then another person joined in, and another. Soon, the entire restaurant burst into applause. The sound was thunderous, filling the room with appreciation and respect. People were wiping tears from their eyes, moved by the beauty they had just witnessed. Some were standing up to clap harder, showing their respect for the young man who had just shared his soul with them. James opened his eyes, surprised by the response. He had been so lost in the music that he had forgotten where he was. He looked round at all the faces smiling at him with respect and admiration. These were the same people who had been watching him with cruel amusement just minutes before. But now they looked at him like he was something special. But when he looked at Victoria, he saw something unexpected. The cruel woman who had humiliated him was crying. Victoria sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming down her cheeks like rain on a window. Her expensive makeup was running, creating dark lines under her eyes. But she didn't care. James's music had unlocked something deep inside her heart that she had buried for 30 years. The melody felt like a key turning in a lock she had forgotten existed. The melody he played reminded her of a piece she had written as a 15-year-old girl. She could see herself clearly in her memory, sitting at her family's grand piano in their big house. The piano had been black and shiny, much bigger and more beautiful than this old restaurant piano. She remembered her small hands moving across the keys, composing music that came straight from her soul. Back then, music had been her whole world. Her reason for waking up every morning. She had dreamed of being a concert pianist, of sharing her music with the world. She had imagined herself on stage, wearing a beautiful dress, playing for thousands of people who would understand her music. She had spent hours every day practicing, writing new songs, getting better and better. Her piano teacher had told her she was gifted, that she could go far if she worked hard. But her father had crushed those dreams like stepping on a flower. She remembered the day clearly, even after all these years. She had been playing a piece she had written herself, lost in the beauty of the music, when her father had stormed into the room. "Music is for poor people, Victoria," he had said coldly, his voice sharp like a knife. "You have a family business to inherit. Stop wasting time on silly dreams. Rich people don't become musicians. They hire musicians to play for them." She had tried to argue with him, to explain how much music meant to her, but he wouldn't listen. He had closed the piano lid and locked it. "No more music," he had said. "Focus on real life. Focus on money and business." She had listened to him like a good daughter should. She had stopped playing, stopped composing, stopped dreaming. She had studied business instead of music, learned about money instead of melodies. She had become exactly what he wanted, a wealthy woman with no purpose except to spend money and look important. Over the years, she had tried to forget about music, to push those dreams so deep inside herself that they wouldn't hurt anymore. She had married a man her father chose, lived in houses that impressed other people, and bought things that meant nothing to her. She had become cold and empty, using her money to control others because it was the only power she had left. Now, watching James play with such passion and talent, she realized what she had lost. She had become bitter and cruel because she had given up the one thing that made her feel alive. She had spent 30 years punishing the world for the dreams her father had stolen from her daughters. James stood up from the piano bench. Victoria knew she had to do something. She had spent years hurting others because of her own pain. She had used her wealth as a weapon instead of a gift. She had become the kind of person she would have hated when she was young and still believed in. Dreams, she walked over to James, her legs shaking with each step. James stepped back nervously, his eyes wide with fear. He expected her to say something cruel again, to hurt him more now that he was feeling good about himself. Instead, Victoria spoke quietly, her voice shaking like leaves in the wind. "I'm sorry. What I did to you was wrong. I asked you to play, to embarrass you, but you created something beautiful." James didn't know what to say. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no words came out. He had never seen a rich person apologize to someone like him. In his experience, wealthy people never admitted they were wrong, especially not to poor people. "I used to play piano," Victoria continued, surprising herself with her honesty. The words felt strange in her mouth, like speaking a language she had forgotten. "I gave up my dreams long ago, and I've been angry ever since. I took that anger out on you, and I'm truly sorry." She reached into her expensive purse and pulled out a business card. Her hands were still shaking as she held it out to him. "I want to help you, not because I feel guilty, but because talent like yours should be shared with the world." James looked at the card suspiciously, afraid to take it. "Why would you help me?" Victoria smiled sadly. And for the first time in years, her smile was real. "Because I wish someone had helped me when I was your age, and because it's never too late to do the right thing." 3 months later, James hardly recognized his life. Everything had changed so completely that sometimes he felt like he was living in a dream. Victoria had kept her promise in ways he never could have imagined. She had introduced him to the best music teachers in London, people who normally only taught the children of wealthy families. She had taken him to meet concert promoters who could help him get performances in important venues. She had even introduced him to other musicians who were already successful, people who could teach him about the music business. She had paid for his music lessons without asking for anything in return. The expensive lessons that he could never afford were now his reality. She had also helped him apply to the best music schools in the country, schools that he had only dreamed of attending. She had even quit his waiter job so he could focus completely on his music. But more importantly, she had become his friend. This was the most surprising change of all. The cruel woman who had humiliated him in the restaurant had become someone he looked forward to seeing. They talked about music, about life, about dreams and disappointments. She listened to his problems and gave him advice like a caring older sister. Victoria had changed too, and everyone who knew her noticed the difference. She had started playing piano again, and the music brought back the joy she had lost decades ago. Her fingers remembered the keys like an old friend returning home. Every day, she spent hours at her piano, playing pieces she had loved as a young girl and learning new ones that challenged her skills. She found herself smiling more, laughing more, feeling more alive than she had in years. Her servants noticed that she was kinder to them now. Her neighbors saw her walking in her garden, humming melodies under her breath. Even strangers on the street could see that something had changed in her face. The bitter lines round her mouth had softened, and her eyes sparkled with something that had been missing for 30 years. "Play that piece again," Victoria said as she sat next to James at her grand piano. The piano was beautiful, made of polished black wood that reflected the light from the chandelier above. They had been practicing together every Tuesday evening for months. These evenings had become the highlight of both their weeks. James played the melody he had performed that night in the restaurant. His fingers moved across the keys with confidence now, no longer shaking with fear or anger. The music flowed from him like water from a spring, natural and pure. It still moved them both to tears, But now they were tears of joy rather than pain. "You know," Victoria said softly, her voice full of memories, "I wrote a piece just like that when I was young. I thought I had forgotten it completely. But when you played that night, it all came back to me like it was yesterday." She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, full of longing and lost dreams. The notes seemed to tell a story of a young girl who had loved music more than anything in the world. James listened with wonder, amazed by the beauty of the music and the skill with which Victoria played it. "Why did you stop?" he asked when she finished, his voice gentle and caring. Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking down at her hands on the keys. "I let someone else's fears become my own. I let someone convince me that my dreams weren't worth pursuing. I was young and didn't know how to fight for what I wanted." "It's not too late," James said gently, placing his hand on her shoulder. "You could still perform. Your music is beautiful. People would love to hear it." Victoria shook her head. But she was smiling. "My time for that has passed. I am too old to start a concert career now. But I can help others achieve their dreams. I've started a foundation to help young musicians from poor families. I want to make sure no one else has to work 3 jobs just to afford music lessons." James felt his eyes fill with tears. The foundation was already helping dozens of young musicians across the city. Victoria had used her wealth to give other people the chances she never had. "Victoria, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," she replied, her voice warm and sincere. "You gave me something more valuable than anything I've ever owned. You reminded me who I used to be, and who I could still become." They sat together in comfortable silence. Two people from different worlds who had found healing through music and friendship. The evening light streamed through the windows, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear other people playing music, sharing the joy they had rediscovered together. 1 year later, James stood backstage at London's Royal Albert Hall, adjusting his bow tie with nervous hands. His fingers trembled as he tried to make the tie sit perfectly straight. Tonight was his debut concert, the moment he had dreamed of since he was a small boy. Hundreds of people had come to hear him play, filling every seat in the famous concert hall. The backstage area buzzed with activity. Stage workers prepared the lights and sound equipment. He peeked through the heavy red curtain and saw Victoria sitting in the front row, beaming with pride like a proud mother watching her child graduate. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual expensive gowns, and her face glowed with happiness. Next to her sat 12 young musicians from her foundation. Talented young people who would never have had opportunities. Without her help, some were holding violins, others had flutes, and a few carried sheet music they had written themselves. Victoria had changed completely over the past year. She spent her days teaching piano to children from poor families, her hands guiding their small fingers across the keys. She funded music programs in schools that couldn't afford instruments, buying pianos and guitars and drums for students who had never touched a musical instrument before. She helped young artists achieve their dreams, just as she had helped James. She had found her purpose at last, and it filled her heart with more joy than all her money ever had done. As James walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. The sound was like thunder, rolling through the grand hall and bouncing off the beautiful ceiling. He wore a simple black suit that Victoria had bought for him, and his shoes were new and shiny. He sat at the beautiful grand piano in the center of the stage, its black surface reflecting the bright stage lights. He placed his hands on the keys and took a deep breath, remembering that night in the restaurant when his life had changed forever. He began to play the same melody that had started it all, the piece that had brought him and Victoria together. But now it sounded different, richer, fuller, filled with hope instead of pain. The notes seemed to dance through the air, telling a story of transformation and second chances. The audience sat in perfect silence, captivated by the beauty of the music. In the audience, Victoria closed her eyes and listened. She thought about the bitter, lonely woman she used to be. Sitting in that expensive restaurant with nothing but money and anger in her heart. She remembered the joy-filled woman she had become. Surrounded by children who loved music as much as she did, she had learned that kindness was more powerful than cruelty. That lifting others uplifted her own spirit. James played for 20 minutes, performing pieces he had written himself and classical works that had inspired him. Each note was perfect. Each melody told a story. The audience was completely silent, lost in the beauty of the music. When he finished his performance, the audience gave him a standing ovation. People jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering with tears in their eyes. He looked at Victoria and nodded gratefully. She had given him this chance, paid for his lessons, introduced him to the right people, and supported him every step of the way. But he had given her something even more valuable, the chance to become the person she was meant to be. Their friendship had saved them both. After the concert, Victoria returned to her music school in the poorest part of London. The building was old and small, nothing like the fancy concert hall. But it was filled with love and laughter. She sat at the old piano that reminded her of the one in the restaurant where everything had started. A group of children gathered round her, their faces bright with excitement. Music, she told them, her voice warm and gentle, is not about being rich or poor. It's about sharing the beauty in your heart with the world. The children nodded seriously, understanding that music was something special, something that belonged to everyone. She began to play a simple melody, and the children sang along with voices that were sometimes off-key but always full of joy. As the children clapped and laughed, Victoria smiled. She had finally found her true fortune, not in gold or diamonds, but in the light she could bring to others' lives. The music school was her real palace, and these children were her greatest treasures. Outside, the sun was setting over London, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere across the city, James was probably practicing at his own piano, preparing for his next concert. The melody they had shared that night in the restaurant continued to play in both their hearts, a song of hope that would never end. The end.